Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to January 2019. Can you believe we're in January already? January 2019's webinar series. We're so grateful today to have our guest, Mara Shora from Shora Solutions, and I'll introduce her formally in just a minute. My name's Chad Erickson. I'm the Vice President of Marketing and Business Development at MyAdvice Media, and your host today and moderator for this webinar. We welcome everybody here. For those that have been here before, you have a good feel for the format that we use. For those that are new, let me explain how we like to do things. We really try to bring in some of the best experts in our industry, who are practice consultants that know the technology, know the space, that can bring value to you in your practice. And I hope that you'll think about it from, what's one new thing I can learn today? And I often believe there's more, but if you think about it that way, you will learn some amazing things today. Excuse me. I'm going to be moderating. So, excuse me. If you do have questions, please enter them in on the question or the control panel for GoToWebinar, and then I will be facilitating those questions to Mara at the end of her presentation. And that way she can just kind of focus on her presentation throughout. But we do want your questions. She welcomes them. We love them. They're very insightful. It's not just for you, it's for our other guests as well. I'm going to take a quick drink there. As a reminder, with Advice Media, we are in the middle of our ski season. And if anyone's coming out to Park City with President's Day weekend or spring break, let us know. We do a Visit Me Ski for free. I've already gone out with a handful of our clients. I'm going out with another one tomorrow. I was out with one just earlier this morning. We love it. It's an opportunity to show off our office a little bit in our backyard, and then pay for your skiing for a day. So if you are coming out, let me know, and we'll schedule that and arrange that. And I know I've got 6 or 7 of you that have already scheduled for the upcoming couple months. So we love to see you here. So let us know. But without waiting any longer, let me go ahead and formally welcome Mara Shora. And today she's going to be talking about becoming a better leader in your medical practice, and really this idea of how do you deal with difficult clients and difficult, sometimes office staff members. But Mara has an extensive background in this. She's a partner and vice president of marketing and business development for Shora Solutions. She brings more than a decade of marketing and communications experience to Shora Solutions clients, and we tap into her all the time as well to talk to the Advice Media clients. She is a level 2 through the Certified Aesthetic Consulting, utilizing knowledge and skills from her previous positions in marketing for 2 separate leading dermatology, cosmetic, and plastic surgery practices in South Florida, which is impressive in of itself, because you can't swing a dead cat around South Florida without hitting a medical spa practice and plastic surgery practice. So the competition is extremely high. And she's also no stranger to the startup world. Mara founded and ran the Leone Company, a marketing and communication relations firm based in Orlando, until she joined Shora Solutions in 2012. Focusing on both internal and client strategies in traditional new media, Mara is a public speaker, having served on faculty of the American Society of Cosmetic Physicians, the American Society of Plastic Surgery, the International Master Course of Aging Science, Vegas Cosmetic Surgery, the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine, the Aesthetic Show, the Aesthetic Academy, the Medical Entrepreneur Symposium, and the Aesthetic Show's Certified Aesthetic Consultant Program. So with that, I'm not sure how she found time to squeeze us in for our webinar today, but I'm so grateful that she did. But in addition to that, Mara is, and Shora Solutions, received the Non-Physician Practice Management Innovator Award from the Aesthetics Awards. She serves on editorial board member for Dermoscope magazine. She was a winner of the 2017 Aesthetic Everything Award for Top Executive. She's a nominee for the Orlando Business Journal's 2013 40 Under 40. She's just amazing. So she's been a guest before. We're so lucky to have Mara here today. Mara, as my friend and colleague, please take it away and educate us today.
Oh, thank you so much. It's always funny to hear your own bio read back to you. So it's just, you go, wow, I do a lot of things. That would explain why I'm a little sleepy this morning. So, but I'm absolutely thrilled to be able. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It takes one to know one. And we are beyond proud We are beyond proud to be working with Advice Media, and we're always proud to be able to refer our clients to Advice Media's team.
So yes, hi there. My name is Shora, and I am a partner in Shora Solutions. And we work with practices, as Chad said, across the country. And we see this happen all the time, where we have some amazing patients that we absolutely love. And unfortunately, sometimes we have patients that we really just wish maybe we had identified ahead of time that they were going to be, as one of our clients call them, special patients. Well, you wouldn't call them headache patients, problem patients, red flag patients, or special patients, as like I said, one of our clients does. Really being able to identify them ahead of time and knowing how you're able to work with some of these unhappy patients or clients is going to really help you, your staff, and it's going to be a game changer for your practice, because frankly, we spend so much of our time inside the practice each and every day that we want to make sure we're running it efficiently and effectively. We know that it takes months to find a patient, and it can take seconds to lose them. Sometimes we don't even know why we've lost a patient, right? So it can take, like we said, months to find that patient. Maybe it's that they haven't heard of us. Maybe it's that they have actually heard of you, but it takes them a long time for you to gain their trust. Your marketing, your social media, your website, they keep coming back and looking at your before and afters. They call your team. They may be ready to schedule a consult right away. They may be just information gatherers when they first call. So we know that we hear more and more about price shoppers as time continues to go on, and it's becoming more and more of an issue. Now, when it takes all of this time for patients, because very, very seldom do patients actually wake up and decide that day, the first time they thought about a procedure, surgical or non-surgical, are they going to come to your office? They've done their research, right? So very seldom is this the very first time that they've ever heard of you, and that's the day that they call. But there's so many reasons that we lose a patient and that things can go wrong inside the practice. And with that, those are a few of the things that we truly want to make sure that we're addressing today in today's webinar. I want to know, first and foremost, what are some tips and tricks that we give to our clients? We work with clients, like I said, across the country. And so anywhere from California, New York, Miami, Chicago, Texas, we work with clients across the country. And so how can we keep them from being difficult and becoming difficult? So that really means we want to look at, why are they frustrated? When they come to us, why are they frustrated? Number one, did they contact your practice and it's taken hours, sometimes days, weeks, sometimes never to actually call them back or to actually email them back? Did they ask to be emailed and instead we call incessantly? Did they ask to be called and instead you've sent 52 emails to a person that doesn't check their email all that often? So we're responding to them how they want to be responded to, and are we responding to them in a prompt manner? I can't tell you how many times we see this, that a website company will do all of that they can, they'll work all of their magic, and yet when it actually comes down to it, they're actually not able to fulfill that lead. So we want to make sure that when it comes down to it, you're actually taking the time and you are responding to the lead in a prompt manner, because the worst thing that could vary from the very start, from the very, very get-go, that will be an issue. So that's checkbox number one. Is your team polite on the phone, right? Do they thank the caller for calling, or does your team sound like they're abrupt, that they're rude? Does it sound like that patient calling your office is an interruption of your team's time? Because that can be so incredibly frustrating, especially when we know that your patients, the majority of you don't take insurance. And so your patients are paying out of pocket their hard-earned money, and quite frankly, quite a bit of their hard-earned money for any given procedure. So are you thanking them for calling? Are you appreciative that that person has actually called? Are you collecting their contact information right from the get-go? And that includes the correct spelling of their first and last name. You're repeating their information back to them, right? So you're not calling them by the wrong name that entire call. So it's not that their name is Lori and you're calling them Lauren, something along those lines, that you're actually going to be having their name properly entered into your system. that you're able to obtain their phone number in the very beginning of the call so that you're able to call them back if the call gets disconnected. Because what's frustrating is whether it's on your end or on their end, if the line cuts short, then something is going to really trigger in them and they're going to say, you know what, never mind, I'm busy, I'm going to go do something else. And they may or may not even call back to become a difficult patient of yours, right? So, but if they do, when they have to call back a second time, they could very well be slightly irritated. You then want to think about, are you properly transferring your phone now? If this means, are you transferring it to each other? So before putting a patient on hold, are you asking that patient if they're okay being put on hold? So is it okay if I place you on a brief hold and then I would be more than happy to answer your question? That is a brilliant way for you to actually address that, okay? So you want to make sure that, number one, you're asking them if you put them on a brief hold. When you're transferring your patient, make sure that you're doing it in a very strategic way. So when you transfer, make sure that the person you're transferring that call to has the name of the caller, right? So you want to make sure that they have that caller's name and they want to know, why are they calling? Because think about when you, as a caller, as a client of, say, the cable company, the phone company, anything that you have to call, and you bounce back and forth from one person to another, and every time you call, you have to repeat the same story, the same request again and again. Think about how frustrated you become. And so truly, I encourage you, when you're transferring your calls back and forth, make sure that you're repeating the information to each other. You're making sure that that call is complete and that you're putting them on a proper hold if needed. It sounds like it's something so difficult, but right from the get-go, you want to make sure that you're setting strong expectations and that this person knows that it is your pleasure to be working together. Now, once this patient actually comes into your practice, they might be the undecided patient. So it could be that they're all over the place. At one point or another, most patients are the undecided patient, but it becomes how we work together on this. So are they all over the place in terms of the procedure that they want, the questions that they want? They don't know if they want Botox or a facelift. They don't know, maybe they want a tummy tuck, right? They're not quite sure exactly what they want. They're told by their friends and family what it is that they should have done, but they aren't quite sure what they themselves want done. So that person may say, I have to ask my husband or wife. I don't know how much this procedure costs, okay? You want to make sure that you're actually thinking about this patient, and some things are a big deal. In other words, we know that especially when we're talking about surgery, you want to make sure that if there's a spouse, that the spouse is on board, because that spouse being on board means that that person will have support at home, right? We know that a spouse can make or break how difficult the recovery can be for a patient if you have an unsupported, whether it's spouse or another member of the family that lives with them and that isn't offering any help, that's making their recovery more difficult, especially as we talk about surgery, but in non-surgical too. Somebody will say, I don't know how much it costs. So this is every patient, essentially in the very beginning. They don't know how much the procedure costs, but do they seem to you like they're wavering based on cost? Now, there's a couple different ways, and we're going to talk about those in another slide or two, but you want to make sure that you are being open and honest about the costs up front. We like to say that it's not a cost, it's an investment, right? This is an investment in your appearance, and it's an investment in you, dear patient. So thinking about that, if you see that a patient cancels their appointments, their follow-ups, right? So as we talk about their pre-op visits, perhaps, if they come in for a package and they're non-compliant in regards to they're not coming in at the scheduled time for their laser hair removal, for instance, but they're still expecting the same result, then that needs to be addressed. And that's also the beginning of a red flag with the patient. So are they becoming delinquent when they're struggling with scheduling? One thing you can help them do is when that patient leaves the office, as they're leaving, I encourage you to set up, especially with patients that have purchased packages, encourage them truly to go ahead and book their next appointment at the same time. And even if it's, for example, a neurotoxin, whether it's a Botox appointment, right? So we know, especially patients that have been coming back, but we know that on average that would last approximately 3 months. So if we know that it lasts approximately 3 months, that's when we encourage patients at that point to book their appointment 3 months in advance. this is going to do a couple things. It's going to keep them coming back to your office. It's going to keep them compliant, and it's also going to keep them happy because they're able to get the appointment slot at that point 3 months out that they want and they hope for. And I would really stress that point to patients too. Let them know that you understand how busy they are and you want to make sure that they get their prized, coveted spot. Now, if a patient has insufficient funds, this is where I never like to say that you need to be taking food off their table. However, if it's not a matter of taking food off their table, but simply a matter of them budgeting, I would encourage them to really explore some of the patient financing options that you have in your practice. So there's a number of them out there. We offer one, for example, but there's a number of them out there. And I would encourage you to really give them as much information on patient financing programs inside your office as you can. Truly third party, you're not the bank. You shouldn't be financing these procedures yourself in-house. But letting them know, even before they have to ask, let them know that this is something you offer and ask them if that would be of interest to them. Don't make them ask for financing and tell you that they can't afford it, because a lot of patients don't like to actually say, I can't afford it, and that they're going to feel even more frustrated. So again, when we talk about a difficult patient or a patient that can be a bit of a headache, guiding them through all of these systems is going to make your life a lot easier. Oh, the upset patient. We've never had one of these, right? We've never dealt with an upset patient. So this can happen either in person or online. So a couple things you might hear. And when I say online, it could be on review sites. It could be on RealSelf or Yelp or Google reviews, Facebook, Instagram. It could be in any of these places. So you're hearing either when they call your office and they're frustrated, they're upset, then you're going to hear that they're frustrated, or responding online. And we know that there's a number of things you can and can't say, which I'll talk about in a little bit. A number of things you can and can't say when it comes to how you respond online. But let's talk for a second about in person. So for example, no one ever told me that this could happen, or something else that signals some sort of pre-treatment anxiety, right? So when they're there in person for their consult and they're saying, I had no idea that that would happen. If the person seems to get frustrated at the very thought of a scar, and for example, with a tummy tuck, or if they are very, very anxious when it comes to not being able to go outside after a specific peel or a specific treatment, then due to either overheating or due to the redness, that's something that you want to address right up front, because that's going to keep them from that anxiety, or that's going to signal a red flag for you. So if you hear this afterwards, make sure that you are covering all of your bases. I like to tell practices to create videos for post-treatment procedures. So you want to, it could be look at what your most popular procedures are and have both a video. You could put them up on YouTube and send the links to the patient. You can also go ahead and give them, which I always suggest, is giving them written instructions. And I don't care if it's their 4th laser hair removal treatment, you want to give them that piece of paper, because they may react a little bit differently the 4th time than they did the 1st time. So when they talk about no one ever told me this could happen, make sure, number 1, that you're reviewing that. Number 2, they're signing off on that pre-treatment, and that they're signing off that you discussed it with them. Also, make sure that you have something easy to digest, and like a video for them as well. Why is the doctor running late? We talk about this a lot as far as the frustration with the doctor running late, and we're going to talk at the end of our session about a few different simple tips and tricks when we can actually talk about how to keep that doctor on time and how to manage those expectations. I was quoted a totally different price, they might tell you. So make sure that everything that's quoted, they receive a printed quote, and a copy of the quote goes in their file, whether you have an electronic file or paper chart. Make sure that you have all of that information right there for them, and that they're signing off on it, that they've actually received it. I also really encourage you, at the bottom of every single quote that you print out, how long is that quote good for? Is it good for 30 days? Is it good for 45 days? Because, for example, your cost of your neurotoxins might go up, and a year from now, then your actual what you're charging patients is going to go up. The same thing could be true with surgery. Your cost of implants could go up, and probably at some point will go up in the next year or 2 years. So that's where you're going to be raising the prices of your treatments, and you want to make sure that they know how long that quote is good for. If you're hearing again and again, my provider never listened to me, you want to make sure, and I think a lot of providers suffer from this, and we as humans suffer from this, is that we get on a script and we need to go through our script, and we're educators, but you need to listen to the emotional component behind patients. And so you want to make sure that you're actually listening to everything that the patient both is and may not be telling you verbally, but may be telling you through body language. So I need you to pay attention to both their body language and pay attention to what it is that they're verbally telling you. And again, this is where it comes back to have everything documented during the course of the conversations. I don't see any difference. Now, sometimes this is true, sometimes this is not true. This is why I encourage you to take before and afters of every single patient. I cannot stress this enough, because I see so often where practices, they fall into, well, I didn't do befores, or well, they've been coming here for years, so I didn't think I needed to. We got busy. I didn't know how to use the camera. The system was down. We didn't load them. I've heard all sorts of excuses. So there needs to be a before photo and an after photo for every treatment that you're doing. I would say the one difference may be a hydrofacial or a microdermabrasion, but that's not even necessarily the case. I truly encourage you to do for every single treatment. So then you sit the patient down and you look at those before and after together, photos together. As patients, we often forget what we looked like before the treatment. So I really encourage you to look at those together. And on the other side, from a practice's point of view, as the practice, you need to be honest with yourself on this one. If there really is no difference, because sometimes we see before and after photos for certain modalities, and there really doesn't seem to be much of a difference. So if that is the case, then I encourage you to be honest with yourself. Either offer them a different treatment, offer them the same treatment, but you're going to offer them another appointment slot so that they're able to have a retreatment. But come up with a strategy that is going to make it right. Also, it may be that if that patient at some point is truly upset about those results, it may be that it's time for them to go see somebody else, because they may not be a candidate for some of the modalities that you offer. And you need to be honest with yourself. And we're going to talk about releases at the very end of this session. When they talk about, well, I wanted my skin to look like my favorite celebrities, right? So whether it's a Kardashian, whether it's somebody else, I always talk about the Kardashians because, let's be honest, they're people's targets right now. Either I want to look like them, I don't want to look like them, whatever that looks like. So that being said, then what you need to do is truly go ahead and really set those expectations ahead of the appointment. Because somebody like me who's incredibly pale, I'm never going to have the same gorgeous olive skin tone, for example. If there's a tattoo removal and you want their tattoo, that they'd say, oh, I want this tattoo removal to look like X, Y, or Z, where it's completely gone and you're never going to notice ever anything was ever there. Is that realistic for them? It may or may not. And so that's when we talk about this, your skin doesn't look like your favorite celebrities, or your breasts or your BBL, whatever that looked like. Then you want to really make sure that you're setting realistic expectations. So you also want, as we talk about the product did or didn't work, again, what are those expectations? And when we talk about, I don't see any difference, it's a very, very similar conversation. So again, set realistic expectations. We talk about how to deal with it when that patient is incredibly upset in the moment. So you want to make sure that you are introducing yourself without being on the offensive. So you're going to sit down, let them tell their story. Okay, let them feel like they are heard. Nothing is more frustrating. And I see this in my 5-year-old niece all the time. And it's true with the majority of human beings. If they feel like they are not heard, then they feel that they're interrupted, they're going to get frustrated and throw whatever their version is of an adult temper tantrum. So let them feel that they are heard. Let them tell their story. Answer their questions and ask them, how can you make the situation right? In their eyes, say, how can I make the situation right for you? I want to make this right. And that's how you're going to go about getting this started when it comes to resolving issues. And we'll talk about the paperwork process that should follow at the end of the session as well. From time to time in your practice, you're going to have the negotiator come in, just like it's the whole first line negotiator. Don't have a great singing voice, but you get the deal, right? So you have the negotiator comes in and they're going to say to you, I have so many friends that are just waiting for me to have this done, right? That's what, just give me your best price because all my friends are waiting and I'm going to send you so many people, or I'll give you this much and just pay cash for the rest. So what's the cash discount? Some of our clients do have a cash discount because that way they don't have to pay for a credit card processing fee. But when we talk about a cash discount, you're talking about somewhere between 3 and 5%. So which essentially equals the credit card processing fee. So if they're saying, I want a cash discount or give me a better price because I have friends that are waiting, or I want you to just throw this in for free, you need to explain your policies and how is it that you handle specific personalities like this, because that person could very well be trying to negotiate you throughout the entire process. I see this more in some markets than I do in others. So you really want to make sure that you're setting the expectations for the patient. If you're a practice that continuously negotiates rates, then that's the expectation, and then you're right on par. But if you're a practice that never ever negotiates your rates, this is something that you don't want to accept this patient, because that is constantly what's going to happen, and they're going to constantly be dissatisfied, and it's going to be a source of frustration. Oh, the shopper. We see this a lot, don't we? So they're either going to tell you, I have 2 or 3 other doctors, I'm getting some more opinions, Dr. X down the street, they can do it for this price, I'll just wait for the next daily deal site to come up because I can get my neurotoxin on a Groupon. So how do you handle this patient? And is this patient really a patient that you want to obtain for the long term? So if you obtain a patient through a daily deal site like Groupon, Living Social, we really, really turn our patients away from this in particular, because that patient is not going to be a loyal patient. So we truly say this is not a patient you want to come and stick with you, because they're not going to stick with you. When it comes to second or third opinions, I'm okay with this. I think we should all be okay with this. We're talking about surgery. We're talking about a brand new personality that we haven't dealt with before in our doctor, our provider, our NP or PA, right? So I'm okay with the shopper. And people are more educated than they used to be before. They're used to being able to get pricing on just about anything sitting at home on their computers, right? So I always say that you want to make sure that truly you are giving them the pricing, but also that you're really not focusing on pricing and you're focusing on what makes your providers different. Focus on the level of expertise. Focus on, does the nurse call the patient every day after surgery for a week? This is what the practice specializes in. We specialize in mommy makeovers. Our injector, this is what our injector does all day, every day, right? We have our cool sculpting machines running all day, 24/7. We would do cool sculpting at 2 a.m. if we had slots open at 2 a.m. because this is how often we do it. You want to focus on the expertise, the artistry, and not necessarily the pricing. If you have people that are only focused on pricing, that person is not necessarily going to be the patient for you down the road, because they may feel that they just didn't get what it is that they were looking for. The red flag patient. So these are patients that right off the top of our heads, they could very well be the red flag that you want to turn away from them right off the bat. So if there's body dysmorphia, and we'll talk about this again in a little bit, right? If there's body dysmorphia going on, they see things that aren't there, then that's going to be an issue. They're not going to be happy with your work, and they're going to see flaws in your work just like they see flaws in their own body that aren't there, or flaws in other providers' work that aren't there. Do they constantly give poor online patient reviews to other providers? Are they already in a current lawsuit with other doctors, right, for this very same thing that they're coming to you about, and really it's because they were non-compliant? Is it that if it's that no procedure you suggest is actually going to work for them, and they, for example, want to have a BMI of 40, but think that cool sculpting is the way to go. Don't take on that patient just because you think that you can get a little bit of dough in your pocket, right? That's not the way to do it. We talk about if that patient that's in a hurry and they're not listening to you, they're not listening to your precautions, and we're going to talk about a couple more examples in a little bit. So that's a patient that you don't want to take on because they're not going to follow your post-treatment care. Your passive jokers that are passively joking about suing you if things don't go right. And most importantly, the intoxicated patient. If a patient shows up to your office, they are intoxicated. They've had a few drinks. They're clearly on mind-altering substances. This is not a patient that is going to be compliant. This is not a patient that's going to be able to follow care. And this is a patient that is really, you're going to fall and have a lot more issues with down the road. So I would tell you right off the bat, these are some huge red flags of patients you don't want to bring into your practice. You want to always remember to smile and take a deep breath before you walk into that room. Dr. Rich Castellano talks about this all the time. Before you walk into a room with a patient, with your team, take a big smile, take a big breath, and go into that room and with positive energy, because you never have a second chance to make that first impression. Finally, don't let your patients bully your staff into a procedure. If you as a provider decide that that patient, and we've seen this, that if you decide that that patient is not a fit for your practice, is not a fit for the modalities or the treatments that you offer, then don't let that patient go over your head and still make an appointment with your staff because they just want something that badly, anything. So you really want to make sure that you as the provider are dictating treatment. If you need to refer them to another practice in order for them to find the care that they're looking for, then I certainly recommend that as an option as well. So thank you so much for listening today. I know that we have a couple questions coming through with Chad Erickson as well. And thank you for listening as I talked about headache patients and successful strategies for identifying them ahead of time and really for treating them. You are more than welcome to connect with us on social media and sign up for our email newsletter on our website. Contact me if you have any questions at all. Thanks so much, Chad. Take it away.
Yes, Mara, thank you. We've got lots of questions for you. So we can hit a few things, deeply. So thank you very much for that information.
Great.
And a lot of things are relevant, because we want to get to, how to kind of keep your cool and how to deal with some of these difficult clients and patients. And I think part of what you're talking about in this, what you've addressed so far is so critical because a couple of things happen, right? You've established things from the get-go of what are the expectations. So from your employee standpoint, it's there, and everyone understands the guidelines and rules from day one, and you have policies and procedures of how to deal with that. So one of the questions that came out, I have several questions for you, is on reconciling frustration between a predominantly millennial staff who's very comfortable with technology and a boomer provider who gets frustrated easily with technology, which this wasn't asked, but I know it's going to be part of this.
Sure.
If they're frustrated with technology, they're also frustrated with those who know how to use it. So how do you help the owner, who's the boomer, understand it's good? It's like pushing water up a stream, but how do you do it?
Sure. So I think that we always say in any sort of negotiation, right? And I'm not saying this is necessarily a negotiation, but we say that in any sort of a negotiation, really when you're trying to showcase your side of the story to somebody that maybe doesn't agree. And so somebody that has a different opinion, that your facts beat their opinion every time. And so it's not just a matter of beating somebody necessarily in that, but the way that you're able to best change somebody's mind and best prove your point. And I will admit, even in our own business, I am a millennial, and Jay, I've said my father and business partner is a baby boomer. So he's in his mid 60s. I'm in my mid 30s. And so we have this conversation even internally a lot. And we see this with a lot of our clients, is that being able to show facts and numbers is actually going to be your best bet. So if, for example, you're talking about wanting to increase your social media strategy, because we know that in today's medical practice, technology can mean so many different things. It can mean the devices you use. It could be the EMR HR system that you choose. It could be utilizing social media, an Excel spreadsheet, right? It could be a lot of different things. If we use social media as one example, or if we talk about including a new database system, for instance, you want to look at numbers. So you want to look at how can it possibly increase the provider's return on investment? So what would that ROI look like? How can it increase the technology you're looking to bring in? How can it help increase new leads? How can those new leads then turn into new patients? And so anywhere from non-surgical to surgical, but the more numbers you're able to crunch and the more facts you're able to bring to the table, that's how you're going to be able to showcase the benefits of technology. We're big believers in technology, and so, but it's using it the right way and being able to not only bring the numbers to the table, but bring a plan to the table. So it's not just necessarily, I want to do this. I want to use Instagram. I want to grow our followers, but this is my strategy, and this is my strategy for turning social media followers, for one, using that as an example, into patients, and bringing that strategy to the table as well, instead of just saying, I want to do this.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Mara. Another question is, you talked about, you've got these difficult situations sometimes. So how do you actually keep your cool and deal with this client when you're maybe having a bad day? This client's difficult, they're not understanding, they're not listening. What are some tools or tricks to be able to deal with them, or how do you diffuse those situations?
So when you're actually diffusing, so you're saying, how do you actually diffuse the situation?
With a patient,
and so with a patient,
and keep your cool. Yeah, with a client. Yeah, how do you do that?
So you want to make sure that that number one, you're listening to that particular patient, that particular client. That the worst thing you can do is jump to a conclusion, and you automatically start jumping to conclusions about what it is that how they feel, or what it is that they're going to think. So number one, listen to what they say, and truly determine do they have a very, very valid point. We always say that we need to remove the provider from being the bad guy as soon as possible, and the provider can be the hero that comes in and fixes the situation. You don't want them to be angry with the provider themselves. So when it comes to dealing with a client, then it's a very different situation than dealing with it internally. So making sure that number one, you're hearing that, and number two, that we're actually listening and coming to a resolution, and that patient, that patient or that client will leave happy.
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it?
You also want to make sure that you know why the client or patient was unhappy. So in other words, is it because expectations weren't set properly? So we see this a lot, that it could even be that the patient wasn't necessarily prepared for an outcome. Maybe they simply weren't listening when you told them what that outcome would be. So it could be that they simply, for example, it could be that you told them again and again about there was going to be downtime after surgery, there was going to be swelling, they were going to need to be out of work for that period of time, and they simply weren't paying attention, or they didn't listen. And making sure that you set those expectations ahead of time, that that patient you have their full attention during the consults, that they're not sitting there on their phone ahead of time, because we know that when we're on our phones, our attention is split. And so we find that we want to look at what it is that's making the patient or client difficult.
Yeah, I think that's a big challenge. I talked to a doctor yesterday, who he was venting to me a little bit. He said, Chad, I saw this patient. He's an orthopedic surgeon. He said she came in, she wanted this procedure, and I couldn't do it because she was a high risk to die on my table. He said, but coming to the hospital, I put her in touch with someone to be able to help her with her health and her diet, and she smokes heavily, she drinks heavily, and she's overweight, and all these people that could help her, and and she went and scorched him on a review site, saying, this doctor is the biggest jerk. He called me a drug addict, all these things, and he's like, how do I win? And I explained to him, I said, one of the first things to do in a situation like that he can do is he can address it by throwing his own ego out the window and calling her. And he's like, I never thought of that. I'm like, look, she doesn't understand you're there to help her, and she's thinking that you're the enemy right now. A simple phone call is probably going to reconcile this and allow you, what you're talking about, listen to her and be able to understand where she's coming from.
Exactly. And people will, if they feel listened to, then that will absolutely change things. I always say that for a red flag patient, that right off the bat, if you don't believe, and we've run into this a lot with our patients, that if there's a red flag patient, for example, if a patient comes in and they are convinced that their implants are what's making them sick, and you say, look, that may or may not, in your head, you're thinking that may or may not be the case, but this patient, it truly is just, this is what might be in their head. They've never been told this by anybody else, but this is what's in their head. I'm using this just as one example, is that if that's the case, and you think this really isn't necessarily a patient I choose to get involved with, we recommend sending them somewhere else. And so you don't necessarily need to take on every single patient. If you see those red flags from the start, then those are not patients that you need to be taking on. And we really say that from the start, is that you don't need to take on every patient. Are there more questions, Chad?
Yes, a couple more questions, Mara. One is, how do you deal with or address an issue when the business owner or provider is the one that's always late to appointments? They're looking at their email. They're they're the one that's the challenge, and the office staff gets frustrated with that, trying to keep somebody on task. How do you address that? Yeah, that challenge.
This happens in almost every single practice that we work with. I would say it's more common in surgical practices, and it's common unless the leadership actually makes a point in changing that. There's some doctors that are very, very stringent about it, but unless you have a doctor that is very, very stringent about it, then we've seen this happen almost every time. And there's very specific reasons for this, is that once you have a patient in that room, then they're not going to, you're not going to turn down that opportunity for additional conversation, right? You're not going to turn down the opportunity for additional treatments, for a little more Botox, for a surgical consult, to sell a hydrofacial, for example, or to sell some skincare products. So as many questions and as many things as you're able to convert with that particular patient, you're going to take the opportunity to do so because you have that patient right there in front of you. So that being said, we do find that having another team member being able to keep the doctor on target time-wise is going to be incredibly helpful. And so that, I would say, make it the job of the MA to help keep the team on task and to help to keep the team on track. So in addition, you want to make sure that you're scheduling appropriately, because sometimes what we find is that when this happens, it can be a scheduling issue. And so it could be that a doctor is saying, look, we want to schedule a patient every 15 minutes. Well, if 15 minutes over time, you're really seeing 15 minutes is not enough, then I encourage you to just be very aware of that and say it may need to be every 20 minutes or it may need to be every 30 minutes. Because if in 30 minutes, you're able to continue to upsell your patient, and you're able to upsell with skincare, with additional injectables, with packages, right? You're able to perform an additional consult and you're able to make use of that time. I would rather see a 30-minute consult, knowing that it's consult and treatment, and then you have that 30 minutes versus 15 minutes where a patient feels that they're being kicked out. Because at that point, that patient will also feel that maybe they don't want to come back, that they're going to go to another provider that can give them the time that they're paying for out of pocket.
Totally. Mark, let me ask you another question. As you think about, a lot of the questions are related to, how do you kind of keep your cool? But maybe the real question is, how do you determine in advance whether or not they should actually take that patient on as a patient or a client? And how do you empower the staff to be able to make that decision and help the doctor understand we don't want this patient?
So I think it needs to be a collective decision, right? So you need to be able to say that the staff is going to be able to have as much input as the doctor, because they may look, and whether we say doctor, PA, NP, even sometimes an esthetician, right? So you want to make sure that you're looking at giving the entire team the ability to make that decision together, because it might be that they are nasty to the front desk and they're sickeningly sweet to the provider. It could be that they are not there, that they're great with the provider, but they're really not as nice to the patient care coordinator, for instance. So you want to look at being able to, number one, collectively make that decision as a team. Number two, what I would say is that you want to make sure, number one, that it looks like you have, and it really truly appears that you have the patient's full full attention. So we talked again about making sure that they're not on their cell phone during the consult and you have their full attention. Is that patient asking engaging questions? Do they seem to understand every single answer that you're giving them? Because if you have a team that doesn't understand, if you have a patient that doesn't understand the answers that you're giving them, they're also not going to understand post-treatment care as well. They're not going to really truly take in that they're not able to go out in the sun after they have a specific treatment, for instance, or that they need to be off their feet for a certain period of time, or that they're not able to lie down for 4 hours after a neurotoxin. And that's when you get into the compliance issue, but that's also when you run into potential risks afterwards and you're going to get an angry patient. I encourage you to look at the personality type of the particular patient. And so is that patient seeing things on their face or on their body that the rest of the world may not see? And so this is becoming more and more of an issue when people want to look like their Instagram and their Snapchat filters, right? So we're seeing this more than we ever used to, and they're bringing in altered versions of themselves of how they want to look. Do they have realistic expectations? Because if your patient doesn't have realistic expectations and the provider doesn't showcase those realistic expectations to them and specifically say, this is realistic, this is not realistic, then that's a whole other issue. So you want to make sure that, number one, you make sure that your patient has realistic expectations. I also say that you want to make sure you're not currently engaging with patients that are in multiple lawsuits with other providers, or they go around bad-mouthing other providers. That's a red flag as well. That they have not only expectations of your work, and they've seen your work, they've done their research, they've looked on your social media channels for before and after photos, they've looked on your website for before and after photos, right? So they know what they're getting into and they've done some research about the procedure, but also that they're going to be taking your advice and they don't turn into Dr. Google themselves. So those are just a few of those red flags about taking a patient on before and knowing what some of those signs might be before you take that patient on.
Yeah, that's great information. So let's say you do take them and you've gone through that and they're there and they're a difficult one. Now what? How do you deal with them?
Sure. So we say that first and foremost, you want to make sure that they feel that they're listened to. And so you pull them into a private room. So as you are of course, and I know you and your team, Chad, talk about what you can and can't respond to online. So if that person has gone and they've left a poor Yelp review or real self, I know you guys talk at length about what you can and can't say. Of course, you can't recognize that they are indeed a patient. You can't recognize what is that they've had done. So what you need to do is obviously invite them into the office or invite them to call. And so once you get that patient on the phone, the goal is to get them back into the office to be able to talk this through. When that patient comes into the office, I encourage you to be out of earshot. This isn't something obviously that you want to discuss in a reception area where other patients can see. You want to make sure that they're out of the reception area as quickly as possible. So this is not a patient that you want to keep waiting we always call the waiting room, traditionally, we always call it a reception area. And so this is not a patient because they're going to fester, they're going to be angry. And so you want to get them out of that area as quickly as possible. So when they go into a room, if it's a male-female situation, again, I would encourage having a chaperone in the room as well. But also making sure simple things like body language, when you're both sitting down together without a desk between you don't have one person standing and one person sitting. Body language can make all the difference. a lot of times people feel that they need to be listened to. You also want to see if they were a compliant patient to your post-treatment care, or if they were not a compliant patient to your post-treatment care. So in other words, if you needed to see them back at the 6-month mark after surgery and you haven't, and they stopped responding, they stopped answering phone calls, they didn't show up for appointments, that's going to be a different situation than how it is you're going to deal with a patient that was very compliant and now there's another issue. You need to look at if there's an issue involved. So if you look at that patient and clearly, for example, they have a ptosis, or they've developed a granuloma, or there's something going on, there was swelling after a treatment, for instance, right? There's something that you're able to treat, then I truly encourage you to treat that at no additional charge to make the situation right, especially if it was the provider's fault, if it was you yourself or a member of your team. I encourage you to treat that patient in order to make that right. There's also additional paperwork, and we help a lot of our clients through this, not a lot, but from time to time it does arise, that there's additional paperwork that we do want them to sign, basically saying that with this treatment, then it's not necessarily that we are saying that we did something wrong, but that we're doing what we can to make them happy. And so there is paperwork that we do encourage them to sign, especially if we are doing free treatments, but also if there comes a point that truly the best thing for both the patient and the practice is to release them as a patient and to refund their money, then what we say is that there does need to be a signed release that's both signed and notarized as well. So there needs to be a release involved as well. And we have had clients of ours that have needed to do that. I think that if a provider practices long enough, you're going to have unhappy patients for one reason or another. And there at one point or another, there might be a complication, or it could truly just be that the personalities are not fitting. And by you having that patient come in again and again and again and again, you're never going to be able to make it right. Not because you aren't an amazing provider, but simply because that patient has such high expectations that you're never going to be able to make it right in their eyes. And sometimes the best thing to do is refund their money, just have them sign a release, and everybody can go on their way.
Yeah, thank you. And Marla, let me emphasize to everyone that mutual and make it mutual. I think that's fair. A mutual non-disparagement agreement, is critical, and that protects you and them, so that if by chance they decided later on to go and do something and leave a review, you would have a legal document to be able to stop that and have that removed immediately. But it shows good faith on your part to resolve this and refund that money. And sometimes that's just the better way, is just, you might be right. Just, you're better off to do that and move on, or find maybe find the right amount that's there that everybody can agree upon. But it's imperative you get that release. I can't stress that enough to everyone.
Yes, absolutely. And for those of you that have either are in that situation now, somebody that's in that situation, we help our clients with this more often than we wish we had to, but we certainly are always happy to help our clients with this. So if you do have that need, feel free to contact us and we can help you with that issue as well.
Yeah. Martin, I'll tell you, just as an example that we've dealt with, and I've had it a couple of times, not very often, but I remember being at a conference, the trade show floor. It's busy, and you got a lot of people around it. And I had this doctor, and he came up, and he just wanted to go off. He had heard some things. They didn't really have all the facts, but he was hot, and he came up, and he was just starting to go. And I said, hold on one second. I said, Doctor, if I came into your office and just started yelling at you and only had half the fact or half the information, how'd that make you feel? And he said, oh, yeah. And he kind of paused. I said, look, I would love to sit down with you. Let's go where we can have a good, calm conversation, and I would love to listen to you and be able to hear everything you have to say. But you're treating me, I feel, unfairly, and I certainly would never do this to you. I'm your place of business. You're in my place of business right now, and let's go talk. You want to be heard, and he kind of caught himself and realized he was a little out of control, but he realized I was willing to listen, wasn't trying to ignore him. And we sat down and we went through it, and through the process, he realized he didn't have all the facts. He was grateful for what I shared. We actually ended up creating a great friendship in business, and that was 6 years ago. He's still a client. Once you realized we're there to help you, and once you got all the information, it was great. But again, I was calm. I didn't allow his emotion to escalate and become equally emotional with him. And that's part of it. It's easy to do, and it's a natural reaction. And can I tell you that I've done that every single time? No. I wish I could do it better with my kids. Sometimes my kids say stuff, and
Right.
my kids are like, do you treat people you work with like this? I'm like, no. They're like, and I'm like, I'm this imperfect dad, And I see it. I want to change that. But great information, and I appreciate that. So thank you very much. Our time is up. I want to thank everyone for participating and listening today.